Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm Major Garrett, filling in for Bob Schieffer. We turn now to the news from overseas and to talk about a year when ISIS became a household name and North Korea threatened at least one of our holiday movies. I'm joined here in studio by Robin Wright, a joint fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace and the Woodrow Wilson Center, and David Rohde, an investigative reporter for Reuters. It's great to have you with us.
Great to be with you.
Let's start real quick. Give me a sense, both of you. We'll start with you, Robin. Where is the battle against ISIS? Where is it going? And what to make of reports that ISIS can't do anything to meet the needs of those it intends to or says it can govern?
Well, ISIS made a huge sweep through Iraq and Syria earlier this year, but they've been contained pretty much since June. The problem is we can't, either the Iraqis, the United States, or the Syrian rebels break through the territory they hold. It's evident in Kobani. I was there a few weeks ago, and the United States has launched about 350 airstrikes, and yet ISIS still controls part of a very small town. Meanwhile, the largest town in Syria is under threat, and we could lose that. The world is paying attention to this very small town, but the bigger stakes are inside Syria, and I think that's where the next year will probably focus.
David, where's this heading?
We've got a story coming out of the Reuters Baghdad Bureau tomorrow about Iraq essentially fracturing. It's a similar problem to what Robin was talking about. The ground forces in Iraq, the army is not coming back together, very quickly. There's these huge sectarian divisions, and there's a real fear that the country will not come back together again, even with the small American effort that's going on there. The airstrikes help, the advisors help, but these deep differences are not fading.
Iran is a significant player in all of our geopolitical conversations. It is against ISIS, though we don't acknowledge it. They're there. We're also working on a nuclear arms agreement. What are the prospects for that, and how do you think Iran will factor into all of the foreign policy conversation in the new year?
For the first time in 35 years, Iran and the United States are on the same page at the same time. And I think both countries really do want a deal. The question has always been whether the conservative Ayatollahs in Iran could buy into a deal with the United States. I think it is possible. Is it probable? It's hard to tell. But it is clear that the United States and Iran also share a lot of interests in the Middle East today, particularly in Iraq, where they both are concerned about the spread of ISIS. And in a broader way, the disintegration of the borders defined a century ago. Will the Middle East implode? It's not just the threat of ISIS, it's the threat that the conflict will have a rippling repercussion across the Middle East, affect everything from the demographics in countries to the price of oil, and affect the whole region for not just years to come, but decades to come.
David, the sense of the White House is if there's no agreement, but there's a continuation of the status quo, that's not a bad deal. How do you view it?
There's a big question mark about it, and the question is really how is Congress going to view it, and how will Israel view it? There's critical elections coming up in Israel, and if the Israelis start lobbying against extending this deal, the sort of status quo, that's going to be a problem. If there's new sanctions enacted by the U.S. Congress, that sort of makes it harder for the Iranians to compromise. They don't want to lose face in all this. This is a huge issue for the Obama administration in 2015, if they can get this Iran deal or not. If they fail, it's a very dangerous situation. Iran has helped push, rebels there to take large parts of Yemen. That's unstable. They've got, very large influence in Lebanon. And, I talked to a senior State Department official, and they said, the Iranians are positioned to create havoc in many places, including for U.S. forces in Iraq. So watch this spring for whether this deal happens or not. It's a huge issue for the administration.
We had an odd news fruit basket with North Korea, Kim Jong-un, the interview, James Franco, Seth Rogen. How's it all figured out? Is this, as the president described, vandalism on the cybersecurity front, or is this something that tells us something more about a new frontier of warfare that we're all going to have to get better, familiarized with, and more capable in defending?
Absolutely. Cyberterrorism or cyber attacks, cybersecurity are big issues for the 21st century. And in many ways, the movie was just a tiny microcosm of the broader challenge. The cost to Sony will probably be greater for the disclosures about its finances and its arrangement with various stars than it will in terms of the future of the interview. But it is interesting that the interview is not the only movie that's being criticized as creating a problem for the United States. Exodus has now been banned in Morocco and Egypt. Pakistan is in a furor over the Showtime series Homeland because it depicts Pakistan as a hellhole. And so it's kind of this whole American culture thing that's also out there in a more amorphous way.
You just gave me a great segue to something David knows well and I want to get to, because I think Pakistan is also going to be a part of our conversation in 2015 in ways that we may not be totally familiar with now. I'll let you use that as an intro. Run with it, David.
Well, what's frightened everyone was this horrific attack on a military-run school. Over 100 children were killed, and there's been this sense for years that Pakistan's army has essentially been playing a double game, and let's be honest, we did this in the 80s. We used jihadis to attack Soviet troops in Afghanistan. It worked great. 9/11 showed us you can't control those jihadists. Pakistan's army has continued that policy, and there's increasing signs that they can't control these jihadists. They couldn't protect this school with children in it, and for the first time I had a sort of former senior administration official say they're worried about Pakistan's nuclear weapons, that if the Pakistani army can't protect school children, are these weapons secure? We've talked about that scenario for years, but things are not going well in Pakistan. These jihadists are getting stronger and stronger. Will the Pakistani army finally confront them?
Excellent. David Rohde, Reuters investigative reporter, Robin Wright, a foreign policy expert across the continuum. We thank you very much for joining us this morning on Face the Nation. Very happy New Year to you both.